Welcome to Friday night's video and our Master Series. This is the 55th video in our Master Series, the 25th video in our first phase processing, and the 4th video on equalization steps. So this is going to be, I'm going to make this like 3 videos because there's my equalization step, we're talking about static equalization, and it's very important. So basically, I'm going to talk about in this video about brick walling at the upper and lower end and doing some cut EQ work and some issues that you may run into there. And in the next video we'll talk about doing some other work and sweeping around. So the first thing that I do, my equalization stage in my first phase processing, I do it with 6 equalizers. So that may sound like overkill to you, but I do it ritualistically. Because the first of all is at the beginning of my chain, I put a brick wall filter. It's filtering the frequency range. And if you can see the brick wall filter here on the lower end, that what it's doing, if you have some other type of parametric EQ that won't give you brick wall, as steep a slope as you can get. So if you have one like this, that the steepest slope you're going to get is 48. So 48 decibels per octave. So that sitting down at 20 hertz, is as good as you can get, then use that. So the understanding of why this is because your ear hears sounds between 20 hertz for the most part and 20 kilohertz. The problem is there can be other sound in the filter or in the sound. And if it's below the frequency range, you can see on your scope or on your spectrogram or on your equalizer that it's going to cause issues in your sound. So there's no point in having them anywhere in there anyway. And also it can cause intermodulation distortion and other audio facts that I'm not going to get into all the reasons of it why, because it can get a little complex as far as dealing with actual audio engineering concepts and things that can happen in audio. You just have to trust me on this, that I'll put one down here at 20 hertz and I'll leave it there, and I'll put one up here at 20 kilohertz so that it's sitting right up at the edge of human hearing. So, and I put one of these at the top, at the beginning and the end of my chain. So once I have one on there, I turn it on before I start EQing, and then I leave this one off at the end. But when I get to the end of my chain and I've done with all my equalization work, I put another one on there doing the same thing at the upper and lower end of the spectrum. That just makes sure that there's going to be, it reduces the chance of intermodulation distortion, audio artifacts coming from the extreme upper end or extreme lower end. This may not be happening in your audio, but if it is and you can't see it and you don't know what's happening, how are you going to know that there's some kind of problem happening in frequency spectrum that you can't see? That it may happen, and I've had it happen. And with my understanding of intermodulation distortion and things like that, I put it on there to try to keep that from happening. And fold back, you can get fold back. The actually frequencies will fold back over into the lower frequency realm from the upper frequency realm when they go outside of the spectrum, and that the processors start causing issues with it, which starts causing fold back into the audio you're working on that can cause a mess. There's a video on my channel about intermodulation distortion, just to give you one example of things happening outside of your spectrum that can be causing your audio problems. So that is the first thing that I do. Now this one at the end I don't turn on until I'm done with all my equalization work. So that's the first thing that I do. The next thing I do is I put an equalizer on there. I will normally use my test sound. That test capture that we talked about, that it's a test capture. Let's say we're working on a vocalist, and it's like, I had him sing a low note for me, a mid-range note, and a high note, whatever his range might have been in there, and have him hold a note for me so that I can go back and test my processing on, because it's easier to test it on that stuff, especially equalization, or any of the processing for that matter, to make sure you're doing a good job of it. So basically what I do is I go back there and I've tested it pretty well. And then I'm going to go find a section of audio. Like in here, I have this section of audio that I've got looped. I've got a loop that's a phrase, and it's got a pretty good range of what this lady's doing. She's singing down low, and then she's going up high and screaming. And, so there's a pretty good coverage of the range of where her range is. And then what I do is I start filtering. So basically what I'm doing is I'm going to go into this with this filter, this EQ on the second step of my equalization. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure I don't have any other nodes activated, and I'm going to start trying to cut out anything in the lower end. So what I'm normally going to do is I'm going to have a pretty steep slope on there, and I'm going to start bringing this up. You can see other stuff happening down here that can cause rumble and all kinds of stuff. Depending on how clean your capture is, it is going to really depend how much you have to worry about that. But equalization filtering is a good thing to do all the time when you're processing. You get done processing something, you might want to go back and EQ it and do some filtering, high-low pass filtering, things like that, notch filtering and cleaning up at every phase to clean things up. That sometimes things add stuff that you don't want when you're trying to get something done. So it's always a really important step, and especially here. So I start bringing this up into it, and let's find out where about the lowest range is, and I'm seeing it's right around down in here. So I'm going to come up into that as close as I can without really affecting the sound. And when I start hearing it that's affecting the sound, I start listening. Is that affecting it in a bad way, or is that okay? Most of the time that's going to be a bad thing. So it's affecting the sound, I can hear it, I obey it back and forth, baby it back and forth, and then I try it again. I'll come up into it again. I might do this 2 or 3 times, trying to find that spot where I can hear it's affecting it there, and I start backing off some. And then I go, okay, well, is that affecting it there? It's not really affecting it much, but I'm cleaning up the lower end after I'm pretty sure. And then I start trying to fuss with it, see how steep of a slope that I can put on it to make sure I've cut out anything of this stuff going on, because most of the time you have like a fundamental and you'll have stuff trailing off the back end of it that really is unneeded content. But sometimes it is needed. Sometimes you'll have some trailing stuff going off it that's adding texture to the sound, and so you don't want to cut it out. So you really start fussing with your slope. How tight of a slope can I come into that? And once you found a slope, A-B it back and forth, okay. All right, maybe a little bit less of a slope there. How's that? A-B it back and forth, A-B it back and forth, until you're not causing harm. Does that make sense? You're cutting out anything that you found that might have been bad that you can, that's unneeded content or content that's causing issues, and that's the target. So once you've done that, then you're going to go up in here and you're going to do the same thing to the upper end. Always remember that the problem with the upper end is that you have a fundamental frequency that's inherent in almost any musical timbre that, unless you're dealing with a bell or something, that the harmonics trail off. So you get a few harmonics off it, maybe intermodulation distortion, or maybe non-harmonic distortion, harmonic distortion, and it's part of the sound, no matter what sound it is. And vocals or human transducers are really difficult to fuss with, because sometimes you can't cut nothing out of it all. It just affects the sound too much. And so up in the upper end, a lot of times you get sound up there that you don't need. And so, to give an example, sometimes I'll bring this down all the way down to like 16K, and it's like it's not really affecting the sound. I'll bring it down there, and it's like you'll be surprised that okay, it's affecting it, and it's making it sound. Nah, it's making it sound bad. Well, if it's not making it sound bad, keep going. I don't know about that. Back off. And sometimes I can get all the way down to like 16K and start fussing with my slope. Now, okay, I had a really steep slope, and I start trying to bring it in. How far can I squish it in there? And it's like A-B in it back and forth, and that's too much. It's starting to affect the sound in a bad way. I back off a little bit. Yeah, it sounds really good like that. And now you've got it. In this instance, I've been able to come all the way down to 16K and cut out a lot of this higher end stuff that I don't really need, that's actually detrimental to the sound, that's just noise. Any noise that isn't needed in the sound eventually causes mud. It's sound that you don't need. It's not really likely that it's going to add texture to the mix. Sometimes it will, but most of the time it's not going to, so I don't think about it. Now, you really need to take this and you need to listen to a bunch of the performance to make sure this is going to work across the performance also. But before we get to that point, after doing that and trying to cut out, you got to be real careful with the upper end. It's much more sensitive than the lower end because of the inherent nature of trailing harmonics off the fundamental that are needed in the sound, that are part of the sound's envelope. So you just got to really take your time and really learn how to do that. Really come back way off, start with a really steep slope, and really come into it and listen, are you hearing changes? Where are you hearing? Is that bad or good? A, B it back and forth. No, if that's actually good, or no, that's kind of bad. And you do it a few times, come back off and come at it again, because the first time isn't always the charm. It takes a little bit fussing around with it. And let your ear adjust to it because of repetition. And you eventually zero in on it, and you'll be like, well, I can come into down to about there, and it sounds pretty good. Then start seeing if you can bring that slope in more. What's that doing? Yeah, that's okay. And you're A-Bing it back and forth, and then, no, I can even bring it a little tighter. And it's like, yeah, is that okay? I mean, A-B it back and forth, A-B it back and forth. Yeah, that's pretty good. It's actually doing something a little bit. So I got between this slope's okay, but when I go to this slope, it's not a little much. You might want to just go ahead and back off a little bit. You might back off just a little bit, come back a little bit, and how's that? All right, yeah, that's good. So you probably can't tighten your slope up anymore, and that was the difference because you backed off a little bit. Then it takes time. The better you get at doing that, the better job you'll be able to do at it. And then you want a notch filter. You want to go through there and find any problem areas. You just listen to it, sweep around. Are you hearing anything that might sound funny? Sweep around. You know what? Where that might be. I mean, it's like, well, right here, right there. Yeah, right there. That could be attenuated a little bit. It might be attenuated a lot. You fuss with your cue, whether you want a wide cue or a thinner cue. Start out a little bit wide. It's about there or something like that to sweep around. And then, sometimes you might only get like a half a dB, a dB or something like that you're cut out. You might get one, maybe two or three of those nodes if it's, a lot of issues, and get it set to where it sounds good. And you've basically filtered it like that again. And it just takes some fussing around, sweeping around, and experiment with it. So that's the next step in our equalization. In the next video, we'll talk about doing our equal loudness contour work and the importance of that. So I'll see you in the next video when we go to the next step in our equalization process.